You know that exact feeling, don't you? You wake up, you pour your coffee, you sit down at your desk, and you just look at your calendar.
Oh, yeah. The morning dread.
Exactly. Instantly, before the day has even really begun, you are completely overwhelmed. You know you're incredibly busy.
Right.
Your notifications are already pinging. Your inbox is just this absolute disaster zone of unread messages. And you have this massive mountain of tasks staring you down.
It's paralyzing.
It is. And yet you probably also know the feeling of lying in bed 12 hours later with this sinking, hollow suspicion that absolutely nothing truly important actually got done.
Yes. The busy work trap.
Right, you spent the entire day at base camp just looking at the mountain, maybe reorganizing your climbing gear, polishing your boots, but you never actually took a single step up the rock face. You're just paralyzed.
I mean, it is the defining condition of the modern knowledge worker. We are constantly in motion, but we are rarely creating momentum.
Yeah.
And the core thesis of our discussion today offers a complete structural paradigm shift for how you view that paralysis.
Let's get into that.
Because we have this tendency, especially highly driven people, to view this as a time management problem.
Oh, definitely.
We convince ourselves that if we just had, a better app, a more optimized calendar system, a new Notion template, or magically 26 hours in a day, we would finally get on top of it all.
Just one more productivity hack.
Exactly. But the central idea we're unpacking today is that procrastination is not a time management problem. It's a decision problem.
A decision problem.
Yes. Every single morning, you are faced with a fundamental choice. You can either delay discomfort or you can conquer it.
I want to really dig into that distinction today because we're pulling from a stack of incredibly diverse material for this deep dive.
They really are.
We're looking at academic analyses on the psychology of delay, book reviews written by software developers and project managers, productivity blogs, and this really revealing Reddit thread from people in the trenches of corporate burnout.
It's a goldmine of real-world application.
And all of this material is reacting to one monumental piece of work, which is Brian Tracy's international bestseller, Eat That Frog.
A classic.
So our mission for this deep dive is to take Tracy's 21 practical, battle-tested methods and actually extract the underlying psychological frameworks.
Right. We aren't just going to list productivity hacks.
No, we are going to examine how to rewire your daily decision-making so you can stop delaying, reclaim control of your day, and dramatically increase your output by tackling your hardest tasks first.
It's about a complete mindset shift.
So to set the baseline here, where does this incredibly visceral phrase, eat that frog, actually come from?
So it originates from a quote famously attributed to Mark Twain.
Yep.
The underlying wisdom is basically this. If it's your job to eat a live frog, it's best to do it first thing in the morning. And if it's your job to eat 2 frogs, it's best to eat the biggest one first.
That's a pretty graphic image.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
In Brian Tracy's framework, the frog is, of course, a metaphor. It represents your biggest, most important, and most difficult task. It is the specific item on your to-do list that you are most likely to procrastinate on.
The one you're dreading.
Exactly. But paradoxically, it is also the one task that will have the greatest positive impact on your life or your career if you actually finish it.
The rules of frog eating are brutal, but straightforward, based on the sources. Rule 1 is you eat the ugliest one first.
No warming up.
Right. If you have 2 important tasks, you don't start with the easier one and get going. You go straight for the monster.
Yep.
And rule 2 is don't sit and look at it for very long. If you have to eat a live frog, staring at it on the plate is only going to make the anticipation worse.
So true.
But let's move past the metaphor for a second because I really want to understand the mechanics of this.
Yeah.
Why do we avoid the frog in the first place?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because if you are a highly intelligent, capable professional and you logically know that writing this proposal or finishing this code sprint will get you a promotion, why is your natural biological instinct to run away from the exact thing that will help you the most?
To understand that, we have to look at the underlying psychology, which is brilliantly deconstructed in the academic paper we reviewed on temporal motivation theory.
Oh, I loved this part.
It mathematically explains human procrastination. It basically boils down to an equation.
An actual equation.
Yes. Motivation equals expectancy multiplied by value, all divided by impulsiveness multiplied by delay.
Okay, let's break that equation down piece by piece, because throwing algebra at a productivity problem is fascinating, but how does it map to someone just staring blankly at their laptop right now?
Let's look at the numerator first, the top half. Expectancy multiplied by value.
Okay.
Expectancy is your confidence that you can actually complete the task. Value is how much you care about the reward. So if you are highly confident you can finish a project and the project has a massive financial or career reward,
Mm-hmm.
your motivation should be sky high, right?
Right. If I know I can write a great marketing plan and I know it will land $1 million client, the top half of that equation is huge.
Exactly. But then we introduce the denominator, the bottom half. Impulsiveness multiplied by delay.
And this is where it all goes wrong.
This is where the modern professional completely falls apart. Delay is how far in the future that reward actually is.
Ah.
That $1 million client might not sign for 6 months. The reward for your massive, difficult frog is severely delayed.
Right. It's not immediate.
Meanwhile, your impulsiveness is your biological craving for an immediate dopamine hit. Checking an email, clearing out a Slack channel, or reading an industry news article provides instant, zero-delay gratification.
So the math actually works against us. The easy, low-value task has an incredibly small delay. You click a button, you get a notification, the brain releases dopamine. But the frog has a massive reward. But the delay is so long that our impulsive primitive brains just discount the value entirely.
We are literally fighting millions of years of evolutionary biology. Biology that prioritizes short-term survival and immediate rewards over long-term strategic planning.
That is wild.
It is, and that is why Tracy's method is so effective. It's essentially a structural hack for this equation.
How so?
By sourcing yourself to eat the frog first thing in the morning, you drastically reduce the delay of the reward.
Oh, I see.
The reward is no longer the 6 months away client signature. The reward becomes the immediate psychological relief, the massive surge of endorphins, and the momentum of having conquered the absolute hardest thing on your plate before 9 a.m.
You manufacture your own immediate reward.
You are hacking the dopamine loop. Instead of getting cheap dopamine from archiving an email, you get high-quality dopamine from surviving the frog.
I was reading through the Reddit thread included in our research, and there was a perfect real-world manifestation of this exact equation.
Oh, the department project story.
Yes. A user detailed how they spent months, literally an entire financial quarter, putting off a major structural project for their department.
Just agonizing over it.
Every single day, they would open their laptop, look at the project file, feel that wave of dread, and immediately opt to check emails, do small administrative tasks, maybe tweak a spreadsheet that didn't even need tweaking.
Yeah, doing everything possible to avoid the frog while maintaining the illusion of working.
They were maximizing their immediate, low-value dopamine hits while the high-value project festered in the background.
And the anxiety of that unfinished project was bleeding into their evenings, their weekends.
We were exhausted without actually producing
A
anything.
terrible cycle.
Finally, they hit a breaking point and applied the frog method. They committed to spending just 1 hour, first thing in the morning, entirely focused on the big project.
Just 1 hour.
Yep. They shut down their email client, put their phone in another room, and just did 1 hour of frog eating.
And how did that alter their timeline?
A project they had actively avoided for months was completely finished in 3 weeks.
Oh.
But what struck me wasn't just the timeline, it was the psychological shift they described. They talked about feeling incredibly light.
The relief.
The mental weight, that background radiation of anxiety, was completely gone. And they noted that the rest of their workday, all those emails and meetings, felt like an absolute breeze by comparison.
Well, sure, because once you've eaten a live frog, nothing else that happens to you that day can be quite as bad.
That Reddit user stumbled onto a profound truth, but if we zoom out and look at the broader application of this, there is a massive catch.
Always a catch.
Eating the frog sounds entirely logical in theory, but it is physically impossible to execute if you don't actually know which task is the frog.
Right.
You cannot tackle your biggest priority if your priorities are just a swirling, jumbled mess of anxieties in your head.
The entire system falls apart without radical clarity.
Which transitions us perfectly to the absolute bedrock of Tracy's framework, clarity and planning.
It's the foundation.
Tracy makes a very bold, uncompromising claim right out of the gate. He argues that clarity is the ultimate productivity concept, and that the vast majority of procrastination stems directly from vagueness, confusion, and a lack of definition around what you are actually trying to achieve.
Yes. When your goals are fuzzy, your actions are inherently delayed.
And the antidote he prescribes for that vagueness is the think on paper rule.
The reading highlights a rather staggering statistic about this. Only about 3% of adults have clear written goals.
Just 3%.
3%. The other 97% are operating on vague desires, unwritten obligations, and floating anxieties.
That's terrifying.
Tracy offers a very strict 7-step goal formula to drag those abstract thoughts into reality.
Let's walk through that formula because while it sounds basic, the execution of it is where most people fail.
Okay, step 1, decide exactly what you want. Be painfully specific.
Step 2, write it down. We'll dig into the neuroscience of why the physical act of writing is so critical in a moment.
Step 3, set a deadline. As the saying goes, a goal without a deadline is just a wish.
Step 4, make a list of everything you can possibly think of that you will need to do to achieve that goal.
Step 5, organize that list into a plan, arranging items by priority and by sequence.
Step 6, take action on your plan immediately. Do something, anything, to start the engine.
And step 7, resolve to do something every single day, no matter how small, that moves you toward that major goal.
The fulcrum of that entire 7-step process is step 2, right? Writing it down.
Absolutely.
And there is a very specific psychological mechanism behind why this works. The research references something called the Zeigarnik effect.
Right.
This is a cognitive phenomenon that describes the psychological tension, the mental itch, created by unfinished or unstarted tasks.
Your brain is wired to remind you of things you haven't completed.
Yeah. When you keep your massive to-do list entirely in your head, your brain is constantly expending background energy, like a computer running heavy software out of sight, just trying not to forget things.
It creates a continuous low-level state of anxiety and cognitive overload.
It maxes out your mental RAM. I can speak to this personally. There have been times where I'm lying in bed at 3 a.m. and my brain suddenly screams, "You forgot to send that invoice."
Or you never replied to that partnership email.
Exactly. My brain is trying to protect me from failing, but by doing so, it's destroying my sleep and my focus. Writing things down is neurologically powerful because it acts as an external hard drive.
You offload that cognitive burden.
You transfer the tension from your brain to the paper.
Exactly. When it's on paper, your brain finally relaxes its grip. It knows the information is safe, so it stops running the background alerts.
Yeah.
If you are a listener navigating a complex job, maybe you are a founder trying to scale a startup, or a project manager juggling 3 cross-functional teams, keeping all those moving parts in your head is a guaranteed recipe for absolute paralysis.
You have to turn abstract, looming, terrifying worries into tangible, attackable targets.
Ink on paper creates that transformation.
And Tracy provides a mathematical justification for this effort, which he calls the 10-90 rule.
Right.
The principle is that the first 10% of the time you spend planning and organizing your work before you begin will save you as much as 90% of the time in getting the job done once you actually start execution.
In practical terms, taking 10 minutes to plan your day can save roughly 2 hours of wasted, unfocused, reactive effort later on.
Hence the military adage he references. Proper prior planning prevents poor performance, the 6 Ps.
But Tracy doesn't just say make a list.
Right, it's a system.
The sources detail a highly structured funnel system for this planning. You don't just maintain one chaotic, endless piece of paper. You create a hierarchy.
Let's break that down.
You start with a master list. This is your ultimate brain dump. Every idea, every obligation, every future project, every minor errand goes here. It is the master repository.
From there, you begin to distill. At the end of every month, you review the master list and pull items to create your monthly list.
Then at the end of each week, you pull from the monthly list to formulate your weekly list.
And finally, the most critical tactical step. You pull from the weekly list to create your daily list.
Yes.
And the golden rule, the non-negotiable habit, is that you must plan that daily list the night before.
Planning the night before is the ultimate defense against morning decision fatigue.
It really is.
When you wake up, your willpower and your focus are at their absolute peak. If you spend the first hour of your day just looking at your inbox, trying to figure out what you should do, you are burning your most valuable cognitive resources on mere organization.
By the time you figure out what the frog is, you no longer have the energy to eat it.
But let me push back on this funnel system for a second.
Okay, go ahead.
If I am already overwhelmed, and you tell me I need to maintain a master list, a monthly list, a weekly list, and write a daily list every single night, aren't I just creating more work for myself?
That's a fair point.
Isn't there a risk of planning fatigue, where the act of organizing the lists becomes its own form of procrastination? I know people who spend 3 hours color-coding their Notion boards and 0 hours actually doing the work.
That is a very real trap, and it's why the framework demands execution over perfection.
Right.
The lists are not meant to be works of art, they are tactical maps. The time spent planning should be ruthless and brief. If you are color coding, you are engaging in tension-relieving behavior, not goal-achieving behavior.
Ah, like that distinction.
The purpose of the funnel is simply to ensure that when you sit down on a Tuesday morning, the item in front of you isn't a random distraction, but something intentionally pulled from your long-term goals.
Okay, that makes sense.
But you raise a crucial point. Just putting things on a list doesn't get the work done, and looking at a daily list of 20 items can be just as paralyzing as having no list at all.
Because not all tasks on that paper are created equal.
Exactly. And that reality forces us into the arithmetic of action. Once everything is on paper, how do you actually know what to tackle first?
This is where Tracy leans heavily on prioritization frameworks, starting with the foundational 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle.
Discovered by an Italian economist studying land wealth in 1895.
Yes. The principle broadly states that 20% of your activities will account for 80% of your results.
In the context of your daily work, it means that if you have a list of 10 items to do, 2 of those items are going to turn out to be worth 5 or 10 times more than the other 8 items combined.
Those 2 items are your critical leverage points. Those are your frogs.
The tragedy of the average workday is that most people spend their time clearing out the bottom 80%, the low-value tasks, while the top 20% is ignored.
Right, because the bottom 80% is usually easier.
It's always easier. But Tracy takes the 80-20 rule and operationalizes it with a very strict system called the ABCDE method.
It is a ruthless way to grade your tasks before you are allowed to start working. Let's break down the categories.
The ABCDE method is where the philosophy meets the pavement. You take your daily list and you assign a letter to every single item.
The tasks are your must-dos. These are your frogs.
Yep.
They carry serious, undeniable positive consequences if completed, and serious negative consequences if ignored or delayed. If you have multiple A tasks, you don't just group them, you rank them, A1, A2, A3.
Your A1 task is the single ugliest frog in the swamp. It is your ultimate priority for the day.
Then you move down to the B tasks. Tracy called these the should-dos or the tadpoles.
These tadpoles, right.
They are important, but they only have mild consequences. Someone might be annoyed if you don't reply to their email today, or a secondary project might be slightly delayed, but it won't derail your career or your business.
And here is the absolute ironclad rule of the ABCDE method. You must never, under any circumstances, do a B task when an A task is left undone.
Now, that rule often causes friction when people try to implement it.
Exactly. And I want to challenge this rule right now because let's live in reality for a minute.
Let's do it.
My A1 task is a massive complex market analysis that requires 6 hours of deep focus. My B task is a direct Slack message from my boss asking for a quick file, which will take me 2 minutes to send.
Okay.
If I follow Tracy's rule and ignore my boss's Slack message for 6 hours because my A task is undone, I'm going to get fired. How does this rigid framework survive contact with the actual dynamics of a modern workplace?
That is the perfect stress test for the framework. And the answer lies in how Tracy defines consequences.
Oh, consequences.
Yes. The categorization of a task is fluid based on its potential fallout. If ignoring that Slack message will genuinely damage your relationship with your boss or derail your employment, then replying to it is no longer a B task.
I see.
The extreme negative consequence instantly promotes it to an A task.
Ah, I see. So it's not about the complexity of the task, it's about the weight of the consequence.
Exactly, but you have to be radically honest with yourself.
Oh, that's the hard part.
Is replying to that message truly an A task? Or are you just using your boss as an excuse to avoid the 6-hour market analysis? Often, we elevate B tasks because they are easy and they give us the illusion of productivity. We are drawn to them because checking off a box, any box, feels good.
The illusion of productivity is so dangerous.
Yeah.
And it gets worse when we look at C tasks.
The nice to-dos.
Right. They have zero professional consequences. Having coffee with a coworker, organizing your desk drawer, tweaking the font on a presentation that is already finished.
Yeah.
I am incredibly guilty of falling into the C task trap. I will sit down, fully intending to write a complex script, and suddenly decide that my entire desktop file system needs to be reorganized right this second.
It feels like work.
It feels like work. I'm clicking, I'm typing, I'm organizing, but I am actively avoiding the frog.
And the sources explicitly warn against that behavior. Low-value tasks multiply like rabbit.
They really do.
If you start your day clearing out small things to warm up, you are actually training your brain to prioritize low-value activities. You exhaust your peak morning mental energy, your highest willpower reserves, on things that do not move the needle.
By the time your desktop is organized, you no longer have the cognitive stamina to write the script.
Which makes the final two categories so vital. We have D, and E stands for delegate.
This is anything that someone else can do. You pass it on so you have more time for your A tasks.
But E is the really spicy one. E stands for eliminate.
Elimination is perhaps the most profound productivity tool available to the modern worker.
Without a doubt.
An E-task is something that you can cut entirely, and it will not make any meaningful difference to your life, your career, or your team.
The harsh reality of time mathematics is that every single minute you spend on an E-task is a minute stolen directly from an A-task. It is a zero-sum game.
I was reading a review of the book by a software developer named Mark DeGroff, and he was incredibly transparent about his own struggles with this.
What did he say?
He admitted that his ultimate e-task was endlessly checking tech blogs, hacker news, and industry forums. Because it was adjacent to his field, his brain categorized it as research.
Ah, the research trap.
It felt productive, but upon auditing his time, he realized it was actively preventing him from finishing his actual coding projects. It was a purely technological time sink.
Yeah.
Attending a weekly status meeting where you haven't spoken in 3 months, that's an e-task. Eliminate it.
But here's the friction point. Eliminating tasks requires a certain ruthlessness. It means deliberately choosing to ignore things and sometimes disappointing people.
Yeah, that's uncomfortable.
And to have the courage to do that, you have to develop a deep understanding of the psychology of delay and what Tracy refers to as creative procrastination.
I want to spend significant time on this because creative procrastination sounds like an oxymoron. We've spent this entire time talking about how procrastination is the enemy. Now we are supposed to do it creatively.
It sounds contradictory, doesn't it?
It really does. How do we actually judge what to procrastinate on?
It comes back to projecting consequences. The potential long-term consequence of a task is the only true measure of its importance.
Okay.
One of the academic sources cites a fascinating longitudinal study by Harvard researcher Dr. Edward Banfield. He spent years looking at the predictors of upward socioeconomic mobility.
What was he trying to find?
He wanted to know what specific traits correlated with long-term success. And what he found challenged a lot of assumptions. He discovered that a long-term time perspective was the single most accurate predictor of success.
Really?
It was a more accurate predictor than family background, education level, networking, or even raw intelligence.
So the defining metric is how far into the future a person is willing to project their actions.
Exactly.
Highly successful people are looking 5, 10, 20 years down the line, and they are making behavioral decisions today that align with that distant future.
Yes.
They are willing to endure acute short-term discomfort today eating the frog because they are hyper-focused on a long-term payoff.
Precisely. And conversely, people who struggle are typically trapped in a short-term time horizon. They make decisions based on what will bring immediate comfort or relief today, regardless of the long-term cost.
That makes total sense.
And this is where the concept of creative procrastination becomes a weapon. Most people procrastinate unconsciously. They default to avoiding the hard things. Creative procrastination is a deliberate, conscious, strategic choice.
Right.
Since the mathematical reality is that you cannot possibly do everything on your list, you must procrastinate on something. You will fail at certain tasks today. Therefore, you must deliberately choose to procrastinate on low-value activities.
You essentially set posteriorities instead of priorities.
Posteriorities, exactly.
Priorities are the things you resolve to do more of and sooner. Posteriorities are the things you resolve to do less of and later, if you do them at all. You are consciously deciding what you are going to be bad at.
Yes.
Like, I am going to be bad at replying to non-essential emails today so that I can be exceptional at this client pitch.
Beautifully said.
One of the productivity blogs we reviewed framed this with a brutal but incredibly clarifying comparison. Failures do what is tension relieving, while winners do what is goal achieving.
That distinction, tension relieving versus goal achieving, is the psychological core of the entire book.
It really is.
As we discussed with the temporal motivation theory, our brains are hardwired to seek immediate relief from tension. Staring at a highly complex spreadsheet, trying to debug a broken piece of software, or staring at a blank page to write a chapter of a thesis, These activities generate intense psychological friction and tension.
And if we think about you, the listener, trying to navigate the modern digital workplace, fighting this tension is harder than it has ever been in human history.
Without a doubt.
Because you are surrounded by highly engineered, multi-billion-dollar tension-relieving devices. Your phone, your social media feeds, your group chats, your notifications, they are perfectly designed escape hatches.
Frictionless escapes.
Exactly. When the code gets too hard or the spreadsheet gets too confusing, the tension peaks. And right there, sitting on your desk, is a device that promises immediate, zero-friction relief. Scrolling through a feed is deeply tension-relieving in the moment, but eating the frog, sitting in that discomfort and pushing through the spreadsheet, is goal-achieving for your future.
The digital age offers infinite, frictionless escapes. This makes Tracy's analog methods like stepping away from the screen, thinking on physical paper, and deliberately eliminating technological distractions. Not just quaint tips, but absolute survival mechanisms.
Right.
If you do not proactively manage your attention, algorithms and interruptions will manage it for you.
It really is the difference between living a reactive life and a proactive life. When you react to every ping, every email, every quick question from a coworker, you are letting other people dictate your daily priorities.
You are spending your entire day eating their frogs while yours sit on the desk and multiply.
Exactly. So let's look at the pivot point. You have planned your day the night before. You have utilized the 80-20 rule and the ABCDE method to find your true A1 task.
Okay.
You have embraced creative procrastination and accepted the consequences of ignoring your C and E tasks. You know the theory. Now, it is 8 a.m. You are sitting at your desk. The master plan is ready. You are staring directly at the ugliest, most intimidating fog.
The tension is peaking.
The tension is peaking. How do you actually bring yourself to take that very first terrifying bite?
Execution is where all the brilliant planning is tested. And according to the framework, the very first step to execution is thorough, almost obsessive preparation.
What does that look like?
You have to clear your desk. You have to assemble every single piece of material, every file, every reference note, every password you might need before you begin.
It is exactly like a high-end chef organizing their mise en place before the dinner service rush. Everything is chopped, measured, and within arm's reach.
Exactly. If you have to stop in the middle of a complex, high-focus task to go hunt down a PDF from 3 weeks ago, you shatter your momentum.
You completely lose it.
And worse, you give your brain an excuse to wander off. The moment you open your inbox to search for that PDF, you see 3 new, unrelated emails, and suddenly your brain latches onto that tension-relieving distraction. You've lost the thread.
So your environment is prepped, but the psychological hurdle is still massive. A looming project like writing a 50-page business plan is terrifying because of its scale. It induces paralysis simply by being so big.
Yeah.
Tracy uses a powerful metaphor here to alter how we perceive the task. He says, take it one oil barrel at a time.
The story behind that metaphor is one of the most memorable parts of his framework.
It really is. Tracy actually crossed the deep Sahara Desert years ago.
A literal desert crossing.
Yeah. For those who don't know, the terrain in the deep Sahara, particularly the Tanasraft area, is incredibly vast, entirely featureless, and deadly. It is just flat, scorching sand extending to the curvature of the earth. There are no landmarks.
Nothing to navigate by.
Right. To help travelers survive the crossing without getting hopelessly lost and dying of thirst, the French had marked the route with black oil barrels. These barrels were placed exactly 5 kilometers apart.
Okay.
Because the horizon is completely flat. Wherever you were on that route, you could only ever see exactly 2 barrels, the one you had just passed and the one 5 kilometers ahead.
The psychological lesson buried in that story is profound. To cross the entire Sahara Desert, the largest, most intimidating wasteland on Earth, you never had to comprehend or focus on the entire journey.
It would be too much.
Trying to process the thousands of miles would break your spirit. You only ever had to summon the energy, the focus, and the willpower to get to the very next oil barrel, just the next 5 kilometers.
When you apply that to your massive A1 task, it changes everything. You can accomplish any massive, intimidating project if you force your perspective down to the next step. You do not sit down to write a book. You sit down to write one single page. You do not sit down to build a new software platform. You sit down to write one function, one line of code. Tracy calls this technique slicing and dicing the task.
And he outlines 2 very specific methods for doing this, depending on the nature of the task.
What are they?
The first is the salami slice method. This is best for sequential tasks. It involves breaking the giant project down into minute, hyper-detailed steps and then resolving to do just one single slice of the task right now to get started.
You don't try to eat the whole salami.
Exactly. You cut off the thinnest possible slice and eat that.
And the second method is the Swiss cheese method.
Go
This is
on.
incredibly useful for amorphous tasks where you don't even know what the first logical step
Oh,
is.
eat the messy ones.
With the Swiss cheese method, you resolve to work on the task for a specific, heavily restricted amount of time, say exactly 10 minutes. You punch a time hole into the task, like a hole in a block of Swiss cheese.
You aren't committing to finishing anything?
Exactly. You are just committing to 10 minutes of contact with the project.
What is so fascinating about both the salami slice and the Swiss cheese methods is how they manipulate the neurology of initiation.
Initiation friction.
Yes. The hardest part of any significant endeavor, the point of highest friction, is the moment right before you start. The anticipation of the pain is always worse than the pain itself.
Always.
By breaking a massive frog down into a single slice of salami or a 10-minute time hole, you dramatically lower the barrier to entry. You bypass the brain's defense mechanisms. And once you take that first step, something almost magical happens on a neurochemical level.
Right. The brain actually rewards you for the effort. Progress. Even microscopic progress, like writing one paragraph or working for 10 minutes, triggers an endorphin release.
It taps into what behavioral psychologists call the urge to completion.
Once we start an open loop, our brains actually want to finish it. It's the Zeigarnik effect working for us instead of against us.
Oh, exactly. The momentum of just finishing that first tiny slice builds immediate confidence, lowers the perceived difficulty of the task, and makes the second slice exponentially easier.
The friction drops drastically after initiation. But as anyone who has ever tried to work in an open plan office or a busy home environment knows, getting started is only half the battle.
Definitely.
The modern workplace is quite literally designed to interrupt you. Sustaining that momentum, staying with the task until it is completely finished, is what actually gets the frog eaten. And this requires a serious transition from mere initiation to the rigid enforcement of discipline, environment, and focus.
And that brings us to what Tracy considers the ultimate test of personal productivity, a concept he calls single handling.
Single-handed.
This means working on your A1 task without a single diversion, distraction, or interruption till it is 100% complete. You do not put it down.
The academic sources we reviewed are ruthless about the necessity of this. They point out the severe, quantifiable penalty of multitasking, or more accurately, context switching.
The human brain cannot multitask complex thought. It can only rapidly switch focus between tasks.
If you start your A1 task, stop after 20 minutes to check an incoming email, return to the task, stop again to answer a quick Slack message, and return again, you aren't just losing the absolute time spent on those distractions.
No, you pay a massive cognitive penalty.
Tracy cites data estimating that stopping and starting a complex task can increase the total time required to finish it by up to 500%.
500%.
That is staggering.
But it makes sense when you think about cognitive load. Every time you come back to the frog after a distraction, you have to remember where you were, reload the complex variables into your working memory, overcome the initiation inertia all over again, and try to rebuild that fragile state of deep focus.
You constantly turning the engine off and having to restart it from cold instead of cruising efficiently at top speed.
To maintain that cruise control, you have to become acutely aware of your roadblocks. Tracy advises that you must identify your key constraints.
What's holding you back?
What is the specific choke point holding you back from single-handling your task? And here is where the 80-20 rule makes another appearance. And it is a hard truth to accept.
Very hard.
Tracy asserts that 80% of the constraints holding you back are internal. They are your own lack of skills, your own bad habits, your own susceptibility to distraction, your own lack of discipline. Only 20% of the constraints are external factors, like your boss, the economy, or your clients.
That is a very tough pill to swallow because it is so much easier to blame a chaotic office or a demanding boss for our lack of productivity.
It is.
But it is also deeply empowering because if 80% of the problem is internal, it means you have direct control over 80% of the solution.
Exactly.
For instance, if you have a skill gap that causes you to procrastinate because you secretly feel incompetent at a specific task, maybe you are terrible at building pivot tables so you avoid the financial report, the solution is entirely in your hands.
You upgrade your key skills.
You watch a tutorial. Continuous learning directly reduces fear-based procrastination. As your competence grows, your fear shrinks, and the frog looks a lot smaller.
It also means taking radical control of your external environment, particularly your relationship with technology. As the old saying goes, technology is a terrible master, but a wonderful servant.
Or a wonderful servant.
If you want to single-handle a task, you must unchain yourself from the master. You have to use autoresponders to set boundaries. You must turn off your desktop notifications, unsubscribe from the newsletters that clutter your visual space.
Yeah, you have to proactively architect an environment where single handling is actually possible, rather than hoping you'll just have enough willpower to ignore the blinking lights.
And it's not just about managing your environment, it's about managing your biology. Tracy calls this maximizing your personal power.
You have a finite amount of high-quality cognitive energy every day.
You have to guard that energy fiercely and deploy it strategically. You must work on your frogs during your peak mental and physical hours.
For the vast majority of people, based on circadian rhythms, that peak is the morning, hence the core instruction to eat it first thing.
If you try to eat your biggest, ugliest, most intellectually demanding frog at 4 p.m., when your glucose is low, your decision fatigue is high, and your brain is tired, you're essentially setting yourself up for failure.
All of these tactics planning, prioritizing, eliminating distractions, single handling, energy management, they culminate in a concept mentioned in the research materials, the Irish word smacht.
Which roughly translates to profound discipline or control.
The central thesis is that discipline is not a finite genetic resource that you are either born with or you aren't. Discipline is a muscle.
Every single time you force yourself to eat the frog, despite the intense biological urge to delay the discomfort, that discipline muscle grows stronger.
You are literally rewiring your neural pathways.
Conversely, every time you give in to context switching, every time you choose the tension-relieving distraction over the goal-achieving action, you allow that discipline muscle to atrophy.
I want to speak directly to you, the listener, for a moment, especially if you are one of the millions of people who now work in a remote, hybrid, or highly autonomous environment.
Yes, listen closely to this part.
When you are sitting in your home office, there is no manager walking down the hall looking over your shoulder. There is no one to ensure you aren't browsing social media or doing laundry instead of working. You have to be your own leader. You have to generate your own urgency.
Tracy suggests a fantastic mental trick for manufacturing this urgency. Put the pressure on yourself by imagining you are leaving town for a month tomorrow.
I love this trick.
If you were going completely off the grid for 4 weeks starting tomorrow morning, what is the absolute non-negotiable must-do task that has to be finished today before you leave? That is your A1 frog. Attack it with that level of manufactured desperate urgency.
Because action builds confidence. Completion builds discipline. When you string together days of eating the frog first thing in the morning, you develop an unstoppable, compounding momentum.
You shift your entire professional identity. You transition from being a stressed, reactive employee who is constantly putting out fires to a proactive, strategic creator of your own success.
So as we wrap up this incredibly deep dive, let's synthesize the journey we've taken today. We started with a fundamental, uncomfortable shift in mindset. Procrastination is not a symptom of having too little time. It is a symptom of making poor decisions.
To fix it, you have to decide to use structural tools. You use the 10-90 rule to plan your day on paper the night before, offloading the Zeigarnik effect.
You use the 80-20 rule and the rigid ABCDE method to brutally prioritize your life.
You embrace creative procrastination to deliberately ignore the low-value C and E tasks.
And once you have identified your A1 task,
Yeah.
biggest, ugliest frog, you prepare your workspace, you slice the task up into manageable bites to overcome initiation friction, you silence the tech distractions, and you single-handle it until it's completely 100% gone.
It is a comprehensive system for execution. But this raises an important final question, and I want to leave you with a thought that builds on Tracy's work, but goes beyond the strictly business-focused source material we've discussed today.
Okay, what is it?
Throughout this deep dive, we've talked about frogs primarily in terms of professional output, market reports, emails, coding sprints, business plans, and corporate projects. We framed the entire discussion around career productivity.
Right, optimizing the daily grind so you can get ahead at work.
But what if your ugliest frog is deeply personal? What if the frog you are avoiding with all your tension-relieving behaviors isn't a spreadsheet at all? What if it is a difficult, long overdue conversation with a spouse or a loved one?
Wow, that's a huge frog.
Or what if the frog is finally setting a firm boundary with a toxic friend or family member who drains your energy? Or what if the ultimate frog is looking in the mirror and finally admitting to yourself that you are on the completely wrong career path and you need to start over?
The exact same psychological rules apply.
The temporal motivation theory is still running in the background. Delaying the discomfort of those massive personal frogs only prolongs your baseline anxiety.
The tension-relieving escape might be watching 4 hours of Netflix or organizing your garage, but the goal-achieving action is sitting down and having that hard conversation.
Tomorrow morning, when you wake up and plan your day, I challenge you to look at your entire life, not just your professional to-do list. Audit your life. Find the ugliest, most intimidating personal frog that is holding back your growth and your happiness, and eat it.
That is exactly why we analyze these frameworks. It's not just about doing more work, it's about doing the right work in every area of life. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Take these concepts, buy a notebook, implement the ABCDE method tonight before you go to sleep, and tomorrow morning, take back control of your day. See you next time.